I do know Patrick.
There it goes. Okay. All right. Well, hello, everybody. And thanks so much for joining us for the Writing Chicago panel this evening. It is the first in a series of Zoom author panels that the press is hosting for our 70th anniversary this year. And we are really grateful to have three of our authors here, Libby Hill, Patrick Reardon, and Andrea Ross. Thank you all for being here. And we are so excited to talk with you. We have some questions that are going to be directed more at everybody, and then we have a couple that are going to be individual. And so if we end up getting off topic a little bit or like whatever discussions that it generates from the questions, totally fine. Just follow wherever the conversation takes you guys. So, what makes Chicago unique as a city and as a location to write about?
Well, Libby should probably start that because the river is the thing that started Chicago, right, Libby?
Well, yeah. I was just going back through my book because it's hard to remember what it is you've written, but it's kind of fun to read the part where they were thinking that in fact a better route to the Mississippi was the Calumet.
Hmm.
And somebody had to remind them that if it was the Calumet, it was very close to Indiana. And the big city, wherever this canal was going to be built, um, a big city was going to arise. And so he convinced them that that they didn't want that big city to be in Indiana. He wanted it to be at the Chicago, and that's why. But very quickly, it could have gone the other way, and it brought to mind the Bears. Um,
Well, and the White Sox too. If you go back long enough, they were going to Florida, so it's the whole thing of threatening to leave. But
right.
the
So,
Indiana, the part of Illinois just south of Chicago was part of Indiana until there was a law passed. Was that before that would have been after the
looking to
18?
see when that let's see when he was saying that. Um,
And when you say he, who do you mean, Libby?
okay, so there was an early settler named Gurdon Hubbard. Gordon Hubbard. He was originally from the southern part of the state, but then he moved up here and he became a big Chicago champion. And and I'm trying to find out whether I believe it was around 1830, 37. Um, but anyway, I make a point saying that Chicago might have lost its position at the head of the canal, according to this person named Henry Blodgett, were it not for Gordon Hubbard, who plowed through Mud Lake. He was an early person who went through Mud Lake and the whole connection. And he made the point that while it might be cheaper to follow the Calumet, the big city would end up to be in Indiana. And that convinced everybody that that it had to be that it had to be at the mouth of the Chicago.
Right. Yeah.
So, but it could have been, it could have
Right.
been.
Hmm, very close. I assume that's who Hubbard's Woods is named after, up on
Yeah.
the shore,
um,
right?
it probably is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. He
But
wasn't he called the Prairie Walker or something?
he
What?
was really influential
Yeah.
and he wrote a lot about the history. I mean, he'd been through Mud Lake, he was really he he I mean, he's a good source
Yeah.
for learning about the early history.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It sounds like you two both know a lot about Mud Lake, and I
Oh
don't.
yeah.
So tell me.
Oh,
Well, Libby, it's your mud.
well,
It's your
um, so Mud Lake was really just a marsh. Didn't have any trees. The swamps have trees, marshes don't. And so Mud Lake was the connector between the Des Plaines River and the Chicago River. And if you wanted to get to the Mississippi, you needed to either portage around Mud Lake, which was a very long portage, or you needed to go through Mud Lake. And so these guys went through Mud Lake, and it took them a long time. And sometimes they would sink up to their waists, and they would always get bloodsuckers on them. And so, I mean, the description of it, I could read it to you, but the description of it is kind of disgusting. You don't really want to do it. But, you had you would have four people in a boat, approximately four people in a boat, in this particular story. And they had poles and and then there were people walking, and then there were people walking around, um, with other materials that they had to take walk the dry route. Um,
Mm.
so it was not something that you want to do.
And the whole
Not
thing about Mud
not
Lake,
something you would do by choice. You just needed to get your stuff from one place to the other.
and
And
that's because that Chicago's where it's at because you could connect the Chicago River and the Des Plaines River through this Mud Lake section. It was basically the end of the Chicago River, and so going back to Marquette and Joliet, they had the idea that if you connect these, then you can come in from the Atlantic, come down the St. Lawrence, go through this, go down the Des Plaines to the Illinois to the Mississippi, go all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. So it really tied together the geography once you made the Mud Lake, you made the connection through Mud Lake. And the original plan was to put in the Illinois and Michigan Canal, um, and that took so long to get done, that by the time it was done, the railroads had come in, and so it wasn't quite as necessary. But then it kept backing up, so then they put in the sanitary and ship canal. But this whole thing of this piece of this area of mud is what makes Chicago why Chicago's where it's at, right, Libby?
yeah, because yes, and Joliet was the one who he was a canal builder. Um, and so he thought in terms of canals. So he thought it would be just a very short canal. It didn't end up to be a short canal, and it ended
Right.
up to be not very straightforward to build this canal. But but that was his conception that there would be a
Right.
very short canal that you would just need to build. Um, but that was basically, that was basically the origin, and because the French were in, Canada, what we now know as Canada along the St. Lawrence, they came along the St. Lawrence. They went down the lake, the side of the lake. They and then they went into the portage, and there were many portages, um, to the Mississippi River. I mean, you could get further north. You could take the Wisconsin River. But there were different portages, but this was the major portage, and the one that led to Chicago through Mud Lake. Um, but so there was a continental divide there. I mean, that's the
Right.
point, that there was a continental divide between Lake Michigan and the Mississippi. Um, and so that had to be bridged one way or the other. So I think of I think in terms of the of today, and thinking about the bears. Also, they're always referring now to the part of south of Roosevelt Road, which has been lying sort of fallow for a long time, and they want it developed. And there have been several recommendations for development, and it's never come to fruition. But apparently now, it's going to be developed, and this would be the east side of what is now the river. But they had to straighten the south branch of the river in order to get to that, and they were very, very excited about this. The Chicago early boosters were very excited about all their big projects, and this was called the Gulf to the the Lakes to the Gulf waterway. And
Mm.
this was a very big thing, and with a lot of money, and it involved the railroads, a lot of uh, a lot of trading of land having to do with the railroads, uh, um, and a hope for uniting the north and the south of the city through various streets. So it was a big celebration when they finally got that done in 1927, but it happened to be the time of a huge flood on the Mississippi River. But they went anyway.
Yeah.
Um, so that's, that's something that, whenever I read about the development of that in Chicago now, I think, well, they have to realize that this was made land, and one of the regulations when they were doing this was that they had to pack that land tight so that it would be usable. That was one of the big things. So now they're going to be digging on it, and I just wonder what they're going to find.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mandy,
Well,
you
Andrew,
asked kind of what it is about Chicago and what makes it fun to write about. It's things like that, right? It's things like these early planners who who could have that vision and say, yeah, we gotta, we gotta connect this over to the Mississippi and we can go all the way down to the Gulf and things like that, or rebuilding after the fire in 71. I feel like those early Chicago planners, they had such big ideas and they weren't afraid to follow
Yeah, and they love to take credit for them too. I mean, they would always these big projects. They would have shovel days. So they would have a big celebration for Shovel Day, and then they would have a big celebration for Opening Day. I mean, there aren't any projects like that now. That you could have a shovel day and have everybody come and then give these big flowery speeches. Um,
them, right?
they were just full of themselves, and very, everything was very political as it is now. So that hasn't changed. But yeah. So, and then at the turn of the century, and when I think of the turn of the century, I mean 19th to 20th. I don't think anybody refers to the turn of the century from 20 to 21.
Not
Um,
yet.
there were all these major civically minded people who believed in parks and believed in beauty and so on. And not only Daniel Burnham, but other people, Dwight Perkins, who was the father of the forest preserves. I mean, they thought in terms they called themselves, according to Dwight Perkins, they called themselves the Committee on the Universe. Can you imagine a bunch of people getting together now? I mean, Frank Lloyd Wright was a part of this. Can you imagine a bunch of people getting together now and even having a vision or a thought, the Committee on the Universe? They got together for lunches, and
you know,
so anyway, I think that's one of the things that makes Chicago, that made Chicago big. And we have to remember that history, I think.
Mhm.
well, Andrea, Libby and I both have written about things, the river and the loop. You've actually written about human beings. What is it like writing about living Chicagoans as opposed to living Chicago landmarks?
Well, I don't write about living Chicagoans. I write about dead Chicagoans.
Well, all right, dead
But
Chicagoans, but they were once living.
they were once living. Yes. Yeah. Well, actually, that was kind of one of the delights of writing Edith. Would I came across her because she was such an interesting character, but then I discovered all these amazing facts of Chicago history that I didn't know about, and the city just kind of came alive through Edith's eyes for me, which was really fun. And then for this book that came out in the fall about the Fay sisters, a similar thing happened because, well, like Edith, they were very involved in the arts. So I see the city not so much through the river or through the trains, but I see it through the eyes of these women who are trying to improve the cultural offerings, um, trying to take an industrial city and to make it an educational and enriching city. Um, and I don't know, it's fun to do that because it kind of takes them hopefully out of the shadows a little
Right.
bit, right?
Well, they certainly did that. They certainly, I mean, certainly Chicago has become this hub for, with the museum campus and so on. It's certainly become a real hub for that. It's not just today known for the sanitary and ship canal or that sort of thing. People don't come here for that, except they might come here for the Riverwalk, but they're going to come
Mm.
here basically because there are all these cultural things.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah.
Well,
So yeah,
Andrea,
no.
your three ladies, the sisters, they lived part of the time in Chicago, but part of the time in New York, if I remember right, and in Europe. How did those other places affect them as opposed to Chicago? In other words, how what was their life? Was their life in Chicago more interesting or less interesting or whatever?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, they actually, their father was a priest, and so they moved around a lot in their childhood, primarily actually in the South. They started out in Vermont um, initially, very briefly, but then moved down to Louisiana and Georgia and all these different places before finally really settling again in Vermont, um, up in St. Albans, which is really pretty far north. And then from there, most of them went to Cambridge, Massachusetts for a little while. Zena, the eldest daughter, eldest sister of the bunch, she married Charles Sanders Peirce, whose family was involved with Harvard. So they ended up in Cambridge for a while, but then it was their brother Norman who brought them to Chicago because he was involved in the telephonic exchange, which was, a brand new thing in the 1880s, a new developing thing, and Norman was there at just the right time. So, as was the custom at that time, Norman, the only son, brought along his unmarried sisters. So they all well, the unmarried ones ended up here. And we're just really involved in the development of music in Chicago, particularly in terms of women in music. And then Rose, one of the sisters, Rose Fay, she ended up marrying Theodore Thomas, who was the first conductor of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. So the family was tremendously involved in the creation of that institution and the building of Orchestra Hall. So it's fun to, well, to answer your question, I, in terms of how Chicago compares to the others, there's a letter where the one sister, Amy, writes back to actually a family friend, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and is describing Chicago. And she says, Rose is less bored here than she is anywhere else. Because there's always something going on in Chicago. And, they all have really lively descriptions of the city. And as an author, I found it actually hard to place equal emphasis on the other locations in the book because I am so partial to Chicago. I really want to, describe that.
Mhm.
And I probably didn't do as good a job of describing Cambridge, for instance, at that time. Um, so I don't know. I think Chicago's like a character. Chicago has a personality, right? Uh,
Well, how would you
uh,
describe that personality? Because we've heard forever hog butcher the world, which is long not important anymore. But how would you describe the character? And you, Libby, how would you describe the character?
There is a book written about theoretically the Chicago River called the Chicago, and it was a WPA project. Um, and in that, basically, the river is one character, and then there are all these political characters who who trade stories, who always love to tell stories, and they had various ways of getting, money and power. Um, and it and people have sort of always been t always used Chicago as a story, itself as a character, and the river as a character. And there were all these other characters. Um, so it's sort of hard to pin down what you say is the personality of Chicago. And maybe I'd say it has many personalities, many. It's not just one thing. It is the arts and it is the industry and so on. It was the hog butcher. What would you say it is now? I mean, what would you say?
Well, Andrew, do you want to answer before I do?
Well, I'm going to go back to your original question, and as far as the personality of the original Chicago, and I would say grit. I
Hmm.
would say grit, and like we were talking about earlier, big dreams.
Yeah.
It was not only Mud Lake, right, but it was a city of mud. I mean, it was just
Right.
awful getting around and unhealthy and all of these really uneasy things. But they did it, and they kept fighting for these big projects, whether it was rebuilding the city after 1871 or whether it was all of a sudden this Ross Columbian exposition. Like, holy cow, let's build that giant white city. That's crazy. Or whether it was reversing the Chicago River. I mean, who does that? Who says, "Oh yeah, we can do that"? Sure, it might take us a few years, but these are big dreams, and they just did them, and I love that. As far as now, I don't think I have a good answer for that. I think it's, well, like Libby said, it's a lot of things. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Yeah,
So over
I
to
like
you.
your word grit because I think that continues all through the history. That there's grit and a kind of blue collar energy and muscularity. There's
Mhm.
what interested one of the things I was researching when I was researching the Loop book was the street grid. And the street grid, we don't think about how that impacts what it feels like to be in Chicago, what it feels like to live in Chicago. I was just in New York at the beginning of June for a week, and in Manhattan, there's all this energy, and there's these straight streets in a certain section, but it's it's not flat like Chicago, and it's broken up into boroughs because geographically it's broken up. It's not all one thing. Chicago, because it's so flat, is a kind of unity in some way that other cities aren't. Um, in fact, the river, until I mean, the interesting thing is the Mud Lake, the desire to create a canal through Mud Lake led the Illinois and Michigan Canal commissioners to hire James Thompson to come and draw a plat of Chicago. And that was the original grid. And from that grid, it has just gone. You can go out to places like Schaumburg and find elements of the grid. You can go west on North Avenue, and it will just keep going straight west forever and ever. Anyway, this and so you had the river there, which separated the city into three sections.
Mhm.
But once you started putting bridges over the river, suddenly you don't notice the river, and so it becomes this flat connected thing. And so the and then just to toot my own loop horn, once the elevated loop is built, you can connect from everywhere in the city. You can get downtown and you can get to the other parts of the city. So that kind of helped unite the city in a way that it wouldn't have been united before. It's interesting, and Libby, I'm sure, could tell us a lot about this. Prior to the bridges being put in and the elevated loop being put in, the south side was the most important side. That was where all it was where the downtown was, but it was also you didn't have to cross a river, so you could just come right up. And the other sections um, were limited because you couldn't get there as easily. So once the bridges are built, then it starts being able to be united. But I think that if you ever been to Pittsburgh? Pittsburgh is divided like three rivers, so it's got these three or four sections. And so Chicago is very distinctive in the sense that there is this unity there, even if we don't. It's also a city of neighborhoods where, as Royko would talk, if you cross the line, you get beat up by the guys at the on the other neighborhood. But there is a sense of neighborhood, but there is also this strong sense of uh, we're not separated the way like Manhattan is separated from Queens or something. It's so grit, I think, and the muscularity, but then also this sense of we're all we're all Chicagoans in a way that other places, I'm not sure that it feels the same way.
You
Does
know,
that
We're
make
all
I'm
sense?
feeling.
I'm thinking about what you're saying, Patrick, and you know, the in the early days, people complained about how long it took to get from the north side of the river to the south side of the
Yeah,
river. And when you went over these bridges, the bridges were drawbridges, and as they still are.
yeah.
And when those bridges were up, you could not get from one side to the other. Um, and I think of it as being, I think of the north side being very different than the south side. I think we have two ball clubs, and nobody roots for both the Cubs and the Sox.
Right,
They
that's
root
true.
for one or the other. So I don't think that we are really, quite as unified as we could be. I mean, there's one long street that goes from north to south, Ashland. That's
Oh,
one.
Western. Remember Western?
Western, yeah. Well,
Yeah,
but it's the longest street, and it goes
yeah.
from north to south. But I don't think that it does any job of uniting the neighborhoods. And people talk about living in all these different neighborhoods, and I think that that's one of the strengths of Chicago is that there are identified neighborhoods and community areas. So I think that that's a strength. I think people think of themselves as Chicagoans. They say I'm come from Chicago, even if they're from Evanston.
From Glenview. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. You
Yeah,
know, you're from Evanston no matter, you're from Chicago no matter what. That's what
right,
you say,
right.
and then you narrow down, well, where are you from, um, so I mean, I think the north and the south, north of the river and south of the river, or very far south, they're very different and they have very different histories. Um, yeah, that's what I would say.
It'd be interesting to really trace the history of the neighborhoods. No, because I think that, Patrick, the unity you're talking about, I think that was particularly evident in the early days. And what you're talking about, Libby, is, more nowadays, Cubs versus Sox, and you don't say you say what neighborhood you're from, certainly, that's kind of your main allegiance. So the question is, at what point did Chicago get big enough that it really started to splinter into these neighborhoods that had kind of each one has kind of a feel of its own. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it does even, from a cultural standpoint, especially.
mhm.
There's Old Town
Yeah.
School of Folk Music, and there's definitely where you live, there's different, people associate different bars, different restaurants, are they
Well, and
define your area, parks as
yeah.
well.
Well, and different groups of immigrants gravitated to different areas, right? So you've got very Polish areas and you've got very German areas, and you know, it, it kind of came in waves, I think. It grew by fits and spurts, would be my guess.
Yeah, but then people moved out and other people moved in. So Albany Park would be an interesting an interesting study as to who came in the very beginning, and then the different ethnic groups that have lived there. And certainly Roseland would be another interesting study. Um, it being in the South.
Sounds
There are
like
a
you
lot
got a
of
few more books in you there, Libby.
no, but I have a map that's big. I don't I don't think you can see. You can, if I point, I've got a map of Chicago neighborhoods on my
Oh,
on
right.
my
Yeah.
wall.
There you go.
I
Yeah.
love that. I love that map. You know,
You're up in Evanston, is that right, Libby?
I am. Yeah.
Yeah. And Patrick, where are you?
I'm in Edgewater. People
Oh,
want to say Rogers Park, but we're south of Devon, so it's Edgewater. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm out in the western suburbs. So yeah,
Where are you?
I'm in Elmhurst.
Uh,
Uh,
Yeah, yeah, right along Salt Creek. Different waterway for you. Mm.
is Elmhurst, what river is Elmhurst nearest?
Uh, we we are very near Salt Creek right here.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah, and which somehow connects to Des Plaines over, I think, in Riverside and so on. So, yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
well,
We've
Des
just
Plaines River, I mean, the Des Plaines River is really an interesting river because it connects Wisconsin and, goes all the way down. And people have asked me to write about the Des Plaines River. And I say I don't have any emotional connection to the Des Plaines River.
mm,
Um, I mean, I like it. It's very nice, but I don't because Evanston is a lot closer to Harms Woods and the North Branch. So my connection was the North Branch and the Des Plaines. I've done Christmas bird counts along there, and and I've noticed how many communities it goes through, but um, it doesn't have the same personality to me that the Chicago River does.
right.
well, you
Yeah.
mentioned emotional connection. Maybe we should all talk about our emotional connection to our subject.
Oh,
How,
Yeah,
uh,
you go first, Patrick. You
yeah,
go
go
first.
well,
ahead, Patrick.
the interesting thing for me was there's a kind of stubbornness that got me to write the book about the loop. I had an idea to write a book of a history of Chicago, and I started gathering stuff, and I was going to use individuals to be the focal point for chapters that would go into
Mm,
whatever. But when I was still working at the Tribune, we did a big takeout on the loop, and one of the key questions was, well, how did the loop get its name? And because we were a newspaper, I got talked to a couple experts and got a kind of an answer, which is, well, it seems like it came from the elevated loop, but for 50 years, historians had been saying, oh, no, 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 that's not correct. It's from the cable car loop that was downtown. Well, how do you prove this? I found I so I thought, all right, well, I'll set aside the stuff I've been doing with people, and I went through thousands of Tribune articles over a period of 40, 50 years, detailing how the word loop was used, and also detailing the information about the loop, the cable car loop, which was actually not one loop but six loops. And there's a map in my book, which it's based on a map that is in Greg Borzo's book about the loop, or no, about the cable car system, which was published by Southern Illinois University Press, I believe. And uh, it shows that none of the cable car loops downtown were very big. So, and when you go through the Tribune stories, and I use the Tribune because it was the only source that had coverage all through this time. There were individual other neighborhoods that here and there would, I mean, not neighborhoods, newspapers that would have some sort of have coverage. But by looking at the Tribune, I could see how the way the public talked about the loops, how it evolved. And so the fascinating thing was that prior to the construction of the elevated loop, the word loop for downtown was never used. There would be headlines about a cable car accident in the loop. Well, it meant in the cable car loop. It didn't mean in the downtown. So the downtown was. So anyway, and I looked at novels prior to the construction of the elevated loop, and there's no mention of loop in there. I looked at memoirs of Clarence Darrow and Edgar Lee Masters, and there's anyway, it just to try to prove a negative is hard, but I was able to do it. And what was even more interesting was, so the thing gets finished in 1897, and immediately there's talk about the area within the elevated loop. So it's the area inside it. And what I was finding out was the land inside the elevated loop, in that it bordered by the elevated loop, was valued much higher than the land outside. So everybody wanted to be in the elevated inside this area, to the extent that realtors every few months would come up with another idea of, let's extend the southern border of the loop down to Harrison, and oh no, down to Roosevelt. I mean, just because if you could extend it, then you were inside the loop, and that was where everybody wanted to go, because the trains would bring people into the downtown. People would get out, and they wouldn't walk away from the downtown. They would walk toward the downtown. So this concentrated all this wealth and power and value in one place. So what? Oh, and so then over the next 15 years, the terms, there was a term for it within the elevated loop, and then within the loop district, and then in the loop district, and then it just, by 1911, so almost 15 years later, it was first used on a New Year's Eve. There was a New Year's Eve story. That's what it was, the focus of one of the chapters, where every word, every description of the downtown used the word loop. So prior to that, it had not been used, and it was starting to get used here and there, but here it was totally accepted. So it took 14 years to make this thing. So the idea that, oh, it goes to the cable cars, and anyway, as writers and historians, we know you got to get sources. Well, these guys were doing their source work. They weren't getting it. Anyway, so I figured this out, and I don't go back to the old book because I realize how important the elevated loop was, not only for at that moment, but for the rest of the century, because first of all, we talked about unifying the downtown, because people could come into the downtown, that everybody owned the downtown. Everybody, it was part, you had your neighborhood, but you also had the downtown. Now, when I say that, there's an asterisk. If you were poor, you didn't have as much access to the downtown as if you had money. If you were African American, you didn't have as much access to downtown. But there were lots of African American jobs downtown. There were lots of, so it was, even if you were on the margins of society, you still were able to use the downtown, and it was part, you owned the downtown. Everybody in Chicago owned the downtown, and that was this sense of, you had your neighborhood, but you were unified in as much as you all owned downtown. You'd go down there to go to Fields, go to Sears, go to the theaters. So, and then as things developed, one of the key moments was when the suburbanization happened, and cities all over the country are losing their businesses, but Chicago kept a lot of its businesses. They didn't lose as much to the suburbs as other places, and they were able to, Chicago was able to bounce back a lot more quickly. And then the Capitol. So I'm finding these stories. So the Capitol then is in 1978, where the city almost tore it down, thinking that they could get, if we tear it down, that'll force the federal government to give us money for a subway. Well, they weren't going to get it, period. They never got it. So anyway, it's just, so what, so my emotional connection to this was discovering all these things one after the other, and being excited and wanting to tell because no, nobody knew this. I was piecing together all these pieces, and it was it there. At the beginning of Libby's book, she talks about how she wanted a book about the river that she then had to write. Well, that's what I ended up doing. I wanted a book about the loop, and I ended up having to write it. So that's my emotional connection.
It's a
It's fun.
fascinating book. I had no idea as I was reading it, I had no idea about the cable cars. I thought cable
Uh,
cars were only in San Francisco. I had no
uh,
idea. It was really fascinating. I want to say one thing about being able to get to the loop. There were also buses,
right.
that took people. And my my professor at University of North Carolina grew up in Roseland. And he talked about and they had no money, no money at all, but they would save up their nickels and they would take the bus downtown because
Mhm.
downtown was really where it was at. So that was a big,
Right.
that was a big thing. So there were other ways that there were ways that you could get to the loop,
Right.
and that was really critical. I mean, that I would say was one of the big things that united, Chicago. I don't know whether there's any history of the transportation of public transportation in the city other than what I've read in your book, but but you could get around.
Yeah. Well, the buses came after the elevated loop, with because the buses, well, actually the cable cars were there, and then they were replaced by trolleys, and then buses came
Well,
parallel with the trolleys. But anyway, it's um,
the
yeah.
trolleys, well, yeah, trolleys came before buses, even in Baltimore.
Right.
Trolleys
Yeah.
came before buses. Yeah.
It's funny though, isn't it? How, like Libby, you said people are telling you to write about the Des Plaines River, but you don't have that in your heart, right? And Patrick, you talked about how you had your sights set on a different project, but then this came along and it's like you said, you learned all these things and you had to tell people because
Right.
people don't know these things, right?
Right.
Writing is so funny like that, that you just, I mean, it happens to me actually fairly frequently now that people say, "Hey, you ought to write about this woman. Here's another forgotten woman.
Right.
There's a lot of them, right? Here's another one, and a lot of them are really interesting. But something has to happen to like ignite this fire in your heart where you have no choice but to write the book that you write.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's really important. I mean, for me, rivers have been a part of my life since I was very little. There was everything in the East is called a run. So if you
Yeah.
go to Washington, D.C., there are various runs. So there was down the street from us, not too long a walk, there was a little creek called Western Run, and it had stepping stones across it. And one of my brothers, who on occasion tried to kill me. I mean, an older brother, and so on. But I mean, well, not really, but I don't
Right.
know. But
Just as
taught
brothers do.
me, he taught me to use those stepping stones across Western Run. And I can remember that I spent a lot of time on Western Run, and it's just something about running water. Um,
Mm.
and right now I'm even working on um, we own a river, part of portions of land along a river in New Hampshire, And I'm working now on creating a conservation easement there because I want to protect that river. So it continues on. It's the river that you really, that becomes a part of you, and you can't help it. I don't know. Maybe I'll write about the Blackwater River in New Hampshire.
Yeah, the river runs through you, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's like
Oh,
Norman McLean. Yeah.
yeah. So Patrick, I like your idea of a Chicago history book based on different personalities. Have
Right.
you abandoned that idea?
Oh yeah, yeah. No, for other reasons. I've been writing poetry for the last 10 years. So I finished the Loop book, and I have boxes of stuff about the street grid and all the stuff related to the kind of physical Chicago. And I just don't have the fire to do it. I just published my eighth book of poetry, and it's like that's where my head's at. It's funny the way that works, but
It's a
Yeah.
shorter commitment, Patrick.
Mhm.
It's a shorter commitment to write a
yeah.
poem,
Well,
unless you're writing a ballad.
pardon?
Unless you're writing a ballad, it's a shorter commitment. I mean,
Uh-huh.
you can
Oh, shorter
capture
commitment.
something.
Yeah, but see, I find myself thinking in terms of books of poems. In other words, not so much this individual and this, but how they relate to each other. And anyway, it's a very um, like the one that was just published is called New Chicago, and it's one poem in 14 sections. Each section um, begins with a quote from Handel's Messiah, and it's all sort of like a kind of um, looking at Chicago, this kind of mythical, biblical, real Chicago with Western Avenue and Ashland and 79th Street, but also with Ecclesiastes Road and Deuteronomy Avenue. Yeah, I mean, it's um, so anyway. I find that you're right. Poems I can do in pieces, but it seems like they all end up being pieces to a bigger, or a lot of them end up kind of relating to each other and say, well, why don't we all sit together and you know make a book? That's how that's working out.
And
I love that.
you have another book that you're going to write? Another
Another
topic?
book of another book of poetry, but
No, no,
probably
I'm
not
asking
history.
Andrea. I'm asking Andrea
Oh,
whether
Andrea.
she,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I'm just curious.
Uh, yeah, I'm actually I'm doing some actually writing for hire at the moment. I quit my day job. I used to work in a grade school library, which was great fun, storytelling and so on. But I'm working for a couple of private families doing some research and writing about their families,
No.
which is a different type of beast because I usually write about dead people, so this is a whole new thing. Turns out they have to approve of what I write, uh, but it's fun. I'm enjoying it. I like having some control over my own time. Um,
Are you doing interviews with the living people?
yes.
Is this a sort
Because
of
I find that such a wonderful thing.
is this sort of like
Well,
memoir? It seems to me there's a memoir craze right now. Of everybody that I know, all of my friends are writing memoirs,
mm,
and looking back and sort of trying to connect their life stories. So is that what you're working on now with for other people?
yes and no. One is just an individual who's still alive, a gentleman who's still alive, who has a very interesting story. Was born in a different country and then moved here and started a business and became quite successful, is now very philanthropic. He is still alive, so it is his book about him with a
Uh-huh.
little bit of his ancestors. And the other one is the family that has hired me to write about their ancestors. who were very involved here in Chicago. So the people I'm writing about are no longer alive, but their ancestors are. So it's just a little bit of a different process, but I don't know. I love taking all these little pieces that I can find in newspapers or correspondence or whatever sources I can find and piecing them together to try and put together a full life and to try to understand what drove that person. Um, it's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle for me. So for me, that's the
Right.
beauty of writing is to try and make sense of another person in some way. And it's a challenge. I'm sure I get things wrong. A friend of mine said to me, Andrea, if you wrote about your own life, you'd get things wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't think she meant it as an insult. I think she was saying, we can only see things through the lens that we're given, and there's always other lenses to see it through. But we do our best to tell the stories as honestly and fully as we can. Um,
Well, I think that's the fun of it. It's all a riddle, and
it is.
you're trying to
Right.
straighten it out. You're trying to make you almost you're trying to make a straight line out of something that's not a straight line.
Mm.
And I think that that's what I found
Kind of like
about
the river.
writing about the river. Things are not a straight line, and you try to figure out, well, how am I going to approach this? Am I going to write something that's contemporary and then go back, and try to fill it in? And, so I mean, I think that's really basically what I was saying, Patrick, about writing a poem. If the poem comes to you, you can write it. I mean, I can sit down and write a poem that has come to me and I am done with it.
Right.
And I don't have to do any research on it. I don't have to go back to the
Right.
Trib,
Right. No, that's true.
try to find anything. It's
Absolutely.
just funny.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So, whereas writing, I mean, even now I'm trying to, see if I can bring things up to date, from what happened in the last 10 years on the Chicago River.
Uh,
And it is, there's just so much of it. And the Chicago River goes all the way up to Lake County. So to try to figure out what I would be able to say and what I
Mhm.
care about, and there are places on that river that I care about up in Lake County that I know they've changed. Much more than in Chicago, where the river doesn't really change, but in
Mhm.
Lake County, they're
uh,
working really hard on it. So, but anyway, you can't do it sequential. You can't, it's hard to figure out, which is why I guess people do podcasts, you know. They can
Mhm.
just pick up a topic and play with that topic for, 40 minutes and then they're done. And then,
Right. Yeah, yeah. Patrick, what are some of, I mean,
well, how
Chicago's had
long
some
did
pretty amazing. Oop, sorry, I was just asking you, Patrick,
it?
what are Chicago's had some really amazing poets. Do you have some favorite Chicago poets that have inspired you?
Um, well, Edgar Lee Masters is pretty good. And Nelson Algren, who wasn't exactly a poet, but his City on the Make is really one long poem, a prose poem.
Hmm.
Um, so it's uh, the thing with Chicago is so many writers who wrote here went away, and went somewhere else to, make their Hemingway is the great example of that, but
Right.
uh, I mean, we did have Saul Bellows, but even Saul Bellow left after a while, went to Boston. Um, so yeah, it's uh, it, Chicago's a wonderfully literate place, but it's also like it's this little kid next to New York. I mean, New York is just has this, and Los Angeles in its own movie kind of way, but Chicago is it's got great literature, wealth of literature, but it's also, and in fact, I think there's more better nonfiction books about Chicago than there are fictional books about Chicago. Um,
Mm.
the best book that I've ever read about Chicago is Nature's Metropolis by William Cronin, which has no people in it. I mean, but
Mm.
it's this wonderful thing about how the Americans came in and basically just reaped all that nature had planted in terms of trees, in terms of the land, the soil, and just made huge amount of money and continues to because nature had developed all this. So it was like, well, that wasn't how the people thought when they came here, but they were taking all of the sunshine that the trees had gathered in and cutting it down to make houses in Chicago. I mean, anyway, it's Nature's Metropolis is this tremendously wonderful book.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, there are more books like that speak to me than the novels about Chicago. Although there are a lot of great novels about Chicago.
I'm
From
actually
the
taking notes here. I
natural
have all.
history, from the natural history point of view, um, Chicago is a real metropolis for the restoration of natural history, for the appreciation of natural history. It's like an ecotone. It's a place where east meets west,
Yeah,
and
right.
it's just it's a real hubbub of activity for natural history here.
Right.
And that's just another thing. I mean, people came to the Calumet to shoot all the ducks.
Yeah,
Mm.
I mean, that was a big thing. They would
yeah,
come to Chicago, and then from Chicago, they would go down to Calumet, and they would just have these big shooting parties. So because there was just so much, rich nature around here.
yeah.
Yeah. So anyway,
Yeah. But I've been taking notes actually during this because you guys have like Gordon Hubbard and Nature's Metropolis and Muscularity and all. Like, I don't know. I'm finding this very inspiring. Oh, grateful for that.
Well,
there's another book by Joel Greenberg. It's the University of Chicago Press, and I'm just trying to remember the name of it right now. But it's a major book about the Chicago area, the
Is
nature,
it
the
called The
nature.
Natural History of Chicago? I
It may
think
be.
that's
It may be. I can't. I don't have it with me, and my phone is charging in another room, so I can't
oh,
even look it up. But I mean, Joel is a friend of mine, and it's just he's just written. Um, so he really establishes in his book. He really establishes the importance from a natural history perspective of what's going on here.
Mhm.
I keep trying to get my granddaughters to come here, and I say they're wonderful jobs. This is a great kind of place to be. It's where it's happening, and but they're tied to the coast. They're
Mhm.
tied to salt water. I'll have to say that.
well, do you all have a little bit more time, or do you have a time that you need to be out? Because I have at least one more question I want to ask, if that works.
Go ahead.
Fire away.
sure.
Okay. Is there a part of each of your books that you are the proudest of, or that was your favorite part, whether it was a particular piece of information, or if it was about, a particular anecdote, anything that was just you're the proudest thing for you about your book?
You mean a favorite part?
Yeah.
It's like people asking me what's my favorite bird. It's whatever I'm reading at the time. It's whatever I'm looking at or thinking about at the time. And I was looking over my book, and I love the story of the Skokie Lagoons, the Skokie, and I love that story. But then I love the story of the guy trying to um, cross the river, and he's stuck because the bridge is up, And he asked the bridge tender, "How can you possibly work here because of the terrible, odor that's coming up from the river?" And at that time, they thought that this odor was what caused disease. Um, and the guy said, "I've been working here for all this long time, and you know, and I'm perfectly fine. And sometimes it's, smellier than others. So it just depends. I mean, I don't have a favorite part. I just love all the parts that I wrote about. So that's me.
Do you have
Well,
an
I think
answer,
for
Patrick?
me, it's the opening pages of the book where I compare the elevated loop to the Brooklyn Bridge.
Oh,
Alan Trachtenberg had this great book, The Brooklyn Bridge Fact and Symbol, and that to talk about how the Brooklyn Bridge impacted Brooklyn and Manhattan and New York. And it's this huge thing. And then the elevated loop, you can't even see it from the air. You can certainly see it from the ground, but it's just this 1.1 mile circle or rectangle rather, and it had a similar impact on Chicago. So the idea of comparing the Brooklyn Bridge to the elevated loop was something nobody else had ever done, and it was I just had so much fun writing that and making it the beginning of the book. So that's I think what. But then, as Libby said, you could ask me tomorrow, and there'd be three other things that were just as favorite.
I wish I had your book here right now because I was looking at it this afternoon, Patrick, and your final chapter, like I would read that out loud. Your final paragraph is absolutely beautiful. It's
Oh,
just
thank you.
it's lovely. So
Thank you.
that's my favorite part of your book. I'm still thinking about the favorite part of my book. Um, and I guess I'll talk about Sisters of Influence, and it's a triple biography, right? So each sister has her own section. But I think what I like the best about it is the connection between the sisters. It's kind of it's the crack fillers, right? It's the glue that holds them together and where they overlap and how they interact and how they support. And because to me, that's the really interesting part of life too, right? Is all the relationships that we have with each other and how those strengthen us. So exploring that for these three sisters, I think, was probably my favorite part of it. Although I couldn't point to a specific part of the book. It's just kind of the feel of it that I think stays with me the most.
Well, it strikes me that you did three biographies, but it was really one biography of the three. In other words, it's about a
Right.
community. You wrote a biography of a community or family, whatever, however you want to, so it must have been quite a challenge to try to make each of the sisters independent, or I mean to deal with them as independent people, but then also it was because they were a community.
Right. Well, but it helped me to understand them that they came from the same cloth,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
That they had this shared childhood, and that's what the book starts with, and the tragedies that shaped them all, and how they all came out of those tragedies, and how their different personalities then um, helped them shape their futures in different ways. So yeah, it's they are kind of one big organism in a way.
Right. Yeah.
but that's a good way to put it. One organism.
Hmm. Right. As we are with our families, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Like it or not.
That's
Right.
right. Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. So,
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. I I really enjoyed listening to your conversation and just I feel like I've learned a lot about Chicago. And we appreciate you being here and just yeah, thank you.
Well, thanks
Well,
for
thank
putting
you
it
for writing
together,
it.
Mandy.
No
Yeah.
problem.
yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed this too. I learned
Yeah,
so much from
yeah.
from both of you, and lots of food for thought.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Fun to get together.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah, let's go have dinner.
Yeah.
You should do that.
I would love that.
Let's try that sometime. Yeah. Well,
That would be great.
maybe
Yeah.
at Printers Row, you know.
Yeah, at
Oh,
Printers
yeah.
Row, it was fun to be at Printers Row and meet other, other authors. Yeah,
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, agreed. Yeah. Okay. We'll plan on that. Printers Row this year.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the
All
press will
right.
be there too, so we'll be excited to see you all.
All
Yeah.
right.
All right.
This
Thanks so
year,
much, Mandy.
wait, this year, next year, 90, 27. We're talking about 27.
Well, September of
Or
20. Wait, where are we now? We're in June.
we're
June.
at
September
the end of
26.
June. We
Yeah.
just passed the solstice. Yeah.
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 Printers Row is always in September. So September of 26.
Ah,
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll plan something.
Yeah.
Definitely.
yeah.
Good.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so
Okay.
much. And we will be posting everything to YouTube here soon after we get all the recordings.
Great.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
Sounds
thank you
great.
very
Thanks,
much.
Mandy.
Great.
All
Thank
right.
you all.
Okay. Bye,
Great
everybody.
to see you.
Bye.
Bye.